Thank you to everyone at Mayday Trust, Tabby in particular, and to you all as part of the New Systems Alliance for inviting me to speak with you. And I'm really looking forward to engaging with you in conversation. I thought what I would do is share with you a presentation that I've put together, where I'll talk a little bit about my approach, the way that I work, and then I'll speak to you about three projects in particular. They're called Frequently Asked Questions, Agency, and Construct. Construct is the one that Alex was referring to a little while ago. And really, just to begin, I wanted to sort of tell you a bit about how I work and the sort of influences and methods that I use. You see, over the past 20 years, I have worked with individuals and groups of people, inviting them to collaborate with me to speak out about their lives, experiences, and the things they're interested in. And throughout this time, I've worked with a wide range of people, including individuals with experiences of mental health issues, people people with addiction problems, individuals who have experienced homelessness, children from lower socioeconomic households, and people who identify as LGBTQ+. The way that I work is participatory, collaborative, and socially engaged. That is, I am invested in co-production, facilitation, pedagogy, and collaboration. The drive that propels all of my work is to use the skills and resources I'm able to access and organize to shake up preconceptions, and in doing so, to lobby for change by critically inquiring into issues of access, power, representation, and social justice. At the heart of what I do is an ambition to work with people who are overly spoken for, to speak out about their experiences and the systems and services that shape their everyday lives. Underpinning my practice is an attempt to recalibrate the relationship between a photographer and a subject by inviting the subject to be an active participant who can take part in a process of facilitation, pedagogy, dialogue, and co-creation. The methodologies I employ are informed by visual research methods used in the social sciences, including autophotography, secondary data and archival study, image elicitation interviews, focus groups, and expressive data collection. The conceptual inquiry, theoretical grounding, and pedagogical impulse of my practice is informed by the writings and practices of anthropologists and sociologists, such as Johann Fabians and Norbert Elias, as well as techniques developed by theatre practitioners such as Augusto Boal, and the social design work of performance artists such as Lois Weaver, as well as approaches to radical education developed by Paulo Freire, Ivan Illich, and Bell Hooks. In particular, Freire's model of education as a dialogical practice that seeks to enable critical consciousness by uncovering the systems and processes that normalize exclusion and oppression, has continued to drive one of the questions that has remained central to my practice for 20 years. That is, how can a photographer address the power imbalance between them and the people they represent? Each project that I create brings together multiple voices to express narratives about the lived experience of participants and present information about the process of our working together. The process that I facilitate when working with participants encompasses a range of activities, from the development of skills to enable the elicitation of information and responses in relation to a specific issue, through to community organizing and social action. And critical reflection on the progression and culmination of this process informs the methods of inquiry and presentation strategies that I bring to future collaborations and the creation of new work. Now, a significant thread running throughout my practice is the long-term collaborative projects created with people who have experienced homelessness in cities and towns across the United Kingdom, in places such as Belfast, Brighton, Birmingham, Colchester, Coventry, Manchester, and in boroughs all over London. I've worked with hundreds of people, and through this process, I've collated thousands of photographs, video, sound recordings, and other pieces of ephemera created by participants that expresses their points of view and visualizes experiences of some of the most marginalized people in our society. So I want to share with you this piece of work called Frequently Asked Questions. Now, Frequently Asked Questions grew out of a project called Assembly, which was made in Brighton between 2012 and 2014 with over 50 people. It was commissioned by the Brighton Photo Fringe. And as part of Assembly, I initiated a partnership with the Brighton Housing Trust. And in the first year, I spent time getting to know the staff and individuals associated with two of their services, a hostel called Phase 1 and the First Base Day Centre. I spent that first year not doing anything with photography or equipment or anything like that, but rather I worked in the kitchens, helping to make and serve breakfast and lunch. So I volunteered in the centre, getting to know the staff of the organisation and their clients. And that was a really important process for me, not only of developing relationships, but also to consult the people there about the work I was looking to create. You know, I talked about my approach. I talked about the plans that I had, the context of the commission by the commissioning organizations, and asked the question really simply, should I even be doing this here? And if so, who should I be working with? Are there any client-led networks or forums that I should speak to about my intentions? Are there any particular individuals who would be interested or would have a point of view that I should take on board? And then after that period, I began to invite people to use cameras and digital sound recorders to capture their experiences. And I met with participants regularly to discuss the images and sounds that they were creating, as well as to record conversations with them. And then I also invited participants to learn how to use digital medium format camera equipment, which is a type of professional equipment that I can speak about a little bit later. And I would work with the individuals over repeated sessions to create what I call an assisted self-portrait. You can see here an assisted self-portrait of Gerald McClavity. And alongside this, I also collaborated with a choir called the Cascade Chorus, which is a choir of people in recovery. And together we regularly sang and recorded and created a performance that was later staged in the exhibition. Now, when Assembly was created for the first time or exhibited for the first time in the Phoenix Gallery in Brighton, this is some pictures from the Phoenix Gallery. Here is the choir and myself and the audience singing. And this is just a few images. This is one of the public engagement events that was held in the exhibition. When the exhibition was exhibited for the first time in the Phoenix Gallery in Brighton, over 70 photographs were displayed, including images created by participants, documentation of us working together, and assisted self-portraits of the participants. And then in the gallery space, there was a 45-minute soundscape that wove together the audio recordings created by participants, as well as our conversations that were recorded and excerpts from the work that was being done with the Cascade Chorus. Our piano was donated by Phase 1 and tables and chairs were lent to us by First Base. And we transformed the gallery into a community hub where there was a whole range of activities that visitors were invited to take part in. You know, to play the piano or spend time contemplating information provided in the gallery space about support and services available to people at risk of homelessness or currently experiencing homelessness. And I spent quite a long period of time trying to find a way to, well, first gather the information about support and services around the country. And I worked with a woman called Tracy Chandler, who is a socially engaged artist, but also a residential project manager for the Brighton Housing Trust. And together we gathered together charity reports, governmental papers, pamphlets, flyers, posters, and project information from across the UK. And initially my thinking was to provide this literature in the gallery space. However, upon reviewing all of this paperwork with the participants while we were planning the curation of the exhibition, it was really striking how most of the information was very general, it was very corporate, it was impersonal, and often it was impenetrable. And it, you know, the kind of feedback from participants was that it didn't provide them with the information they needed when they were experiencing homelessness, or when they were about to face the experience of homelessness. And rarely was the information engaging to read or useful in providing a legible picture of how to access care. And so I struck up a collaboration with Jerry. This is Jerry here. And our idea was to gather information about the support and services available to a person experiencing homelessness, but through a direct request from someone experiencing homelessness and in need of answers. And our work together began with sending an email to council representatives in 44 local authorities across the United Kingdom, written from the point of view of a homeless person, requesting information about services provided in each locality. And at the heart of the email are a number of questions that inquire about a homeless individual's right to access basic living provisions such as shelter, personal safety, health, food, and communication. We thought we'd get lots of really useful information, and actually what we got were mostly out-of-office replies. But that in itself seemed to say quite a lot about the state of legislated support services available for people experiencing homelessness. And so we compiled the responses and installed them in the exhibition of assembly, providing a resource for the visitors to consider, as well as providing the basis of public discussion events. Now, very often when I am invited to speak at events, I'll invite Jerry to come along with me. When he's unable to come along, as is the case today, he's provided a sound recording for me to share with you.
People become homeless for a variety of reasons. Some by choice and others by accident or bad luck. Anyone can potentially become a homeless person. After spending several years on the street experiencing homelessness firsthand, I've developed strong views on the subject. I believe that one of the most important things is to keep things as brief and simple as possible to avoid confusion. People can become ill, end up in prison, or even end up dead as a result of homelessness. I believe fighting homelessness is an ongoing battle that needs to be managed in the best possible way. There are many charities that claim to help the homeless, and a lot of the money made by these organisations often doesn't make it to street level and is unnecessarily wasted on things like administration and overheads. Please answer the following questions. I am a homeless person without any money. Where can I go for something to eat or drink? Where can I find shelter when it is raining or snowing? Where can I go to a toilet during the day? Where can I go to a toilet during the night? Where can I get a bath or a shower? Where can I get clothes, footwear, and a blanket? Where can I sleep during the night that is safe? Where can I go to use a computer? Where can I go to use a telephone? Where can I go to see a doctor? Where can I go to see a dentist? I designed this simple list of questions written from a homeless person's point of view. What do I need and what do I expect to find? I believe there are many places in the United Kingdom that do not have adequate answers to these questions, and I am trying to raise awareness in order to improve the situation for people in the future. It may even save lives. Thank you very much.
And so here we have just a few examples of the sort of little dossier of responses. This is the email that was sent out and the responses that came back from the local authorities. Very, very, very few actually addressed Gerald as the sender of the email. And so we provided the emails in the space for people to read. And then a little while later, I was invited by the Museum of Homelessness to present the work that I'd been doing at Tate Liverpool in an exhibition that they were curating called State of the Nation. And I thought it would be a really great way to go back to the frequently asked questions with Gerald and to think about how we could develop the project. And so 3 years after the first outing of frequently asked questions, throughout 2017, this is Jerry here launching the second iteration of frequently asked questions at Tate Modern. But what we did is we undertook a new round of research into 61 local authorities across the UK. And I should say that the initially Gerald's thinking behind the 44 that were approached in 2014 was to include all of the London boroughs and the top local authorities by population, when the local authority actually had a point of contact on their homelessness or housing pages for people to reach out for information, which actually at that time wasn't always the case. But in 2017, we expanded the pool into 61 local authorities, which resulted in a presentation at the Tate Liverpool space. And what we did is we designed a set of posters that were displayed on a 13-meter wall that mapped out the progression of the inquiry, as well as the performance of local authorities, so that visitors to the gallery could very simply look up a local authority that they lived in or were interested in to see whether there was no reply, an auto reply, or whether they answered questions. Only 5 local authorities out of 61 actually bothered to reply to Jerry and answer the questions. Very rarely did the replies come back from what clearly seemed to be a housing team. Sometimes it appeared that the email would come from another team or a department, from all kinds of really sort of strange and wild kind of headings. And actually, in some cases, the local authority came back to Jerry, treating it as though it was a freedom of information request that he was asking for, when actually what it was a homeless person saying, I've got no money, where can I sleep at night that's safe? And so we analyzed the work and just gave some sort of headline kind of analysis of the data, and also provided some excerpts from the emails as well, so that people could see. Another part of it actually, which I found really interesting, was how there were these sort of response time pledges, thanks for email, we'll get back to you in 2 days or 5 days or 24 hours or whatever. So few actually honored their response time pledge. And another part of the wall presentation was a section called What Are Your Questions?, where we invited visitors to make suggestions of the kinds of questions they would like to see asked or incorporated into the project, or to just provide feedback. And that was a really useful way for Jerry and I to feed into the future life of the project. But the exhibition was more than just a set of posters on the wall. For me, whenever I design an exhibit or create an exhibition, I'm really keen to design public engagement programs, to bring together people to have conversation and to have uncomfortable conversations, or to learn new skills. So here we have documentation of a workshop that was facilitated by Established Beyond, a collective from Manchester, who gave a practical workshop, or a workshop on how to squat commercial properties and what your rights are in doing so. There were film screenings from local activist filmmakers about the squatting movement in the north of England. There was more formal panel discussion events with CEOs of local support services, academics, and people working in policy think tanks for both Conservative and Labour parties. So bringing people together from across the political spectrum. There were performances by the choir with no name. And really the idea was to just find as many different access points to thinking about the topic and the work. And then in June 2019, Gerald and I were invited to present our work to the MPs on the APPG for ending homelessness. And that was a really extraordinary moment, to be able to invite Jerry into Parliament, to sit in a room across from people who have the power to make decisions that would directly affect his life. We then did a third round. You see, after the introduction of the Homelessness Reduction Act, which I think came into effect in April 2018, we thought it would be a really kind of important moment to see how the Homelessness Reduction Act, which legally binds local authorities with new duties in relation to people experiencing homelessness. We thought it was an important moment to see if any further questioning would uncover if the act had resulted in any discernible changes in the way that local authorities would respond to a homeless individual reaching out for answers to these questions. And actually, it was alarmingly just as poor. However, what was interesting is that for the very first time, what we did see were individuals in local authorities actually offering a phone call or a meeting with Jerry. Very few. And what we did is we brought together the research from the 3 iterations in 2014, 2017, and 2019, and staged an exhibition in Bristol at the People's Republic of Stokes Croft. And key, as I've just spoken about, key to the exhibition were public engagement events, including this one here, which was a long table discussion. And a long table discussion is a format, an experimental format that sometimes works really well and sometimes can be quite sort of tricky. But the idea behind a long table discussion is that you bring together invited speakers to share a short statement and find a way to, in doing so, to find ways for the audience to be able to join the conversation. So it's less about speakers talking at an audience sitting passively and listening, and more about inviting the audience to engage in a dialogue or a discussion with the invited speakers, which was actually the approach that I used in Birmingham, which Alex very kindly took part in. And so alongside the long table discussion, which was hosted with the Bristol Cable, a local slow news media organization, there were also practical workshops for artists and photographers, including this one here, to kind of really encourage people involved in visual representation to think through the ethics and politics of representing poverty and homelessness. And this particular workshop, which was really interesting actually, was co-hosted with a woman called Rachel Kiddy, who's an archaeologist based at University of Oxford. And as an archaeologist, she has a collaborative practice where she will train groups of people who don't have a sort of professional experience in archaeology, but have a lived experience in the kind of theme or topic that is being looked for in the archaeological dig. So she has undertaken a number of digs in sites in Bristol that historically have been associated with people sleeping rough in the sort of 19th century. And so she trained people experiencing homelessness to undertake the dig alongside her. And we also commissioned a set of learning resources with photopedagogy, which is a really wonderful platform for art and photography teachers and their students. And again, you know, representing homelessness, photographing people experiencing homelessness is often one of the things that when a young photographer takes a camera out onto the street, may feel compelled to do, but in doing so may not necessarily think through the sort of ethics of what they're doing. And so the set of resources was designed around thinking those things through a little bit more carefully, or at least just asking questions. And then we brought together the photographic work from Assembly, as well as frequently asked questions, into an exhibition on the 5th floor gallery at the gallery at Foyles. Key to this exhibition, and actually I should just say that working in a place like a gallery in a bookshop in central London is, you know, I work in many different ways. I like to show the work in the public realm, so outside in the street or in places where there'll be highly trafficked you know, kind of audiences moving through, like the London Underground, or a bookshop such as this, which has around 30,000 people pass through it a week. And key to this was taking place, which was a day of talks on homelessness and housing justice, where we had, I think it was 19 speakers, including people with lived experience of homelessness, people that work as psychologists, people that work as employment specialists, GPs, historians, literature theorists, creative writers, theatre directors, artists. So people working across the broad spectrum of of the arts and humanities and sciences coming together to share and exchange the creative tactics that they use in their practice to strive to do better work for people experiencing homelessness and to expose the systemic failures of society which perpetuate homelessness. And actually, this was the very last public event that I did before the lockdown began in March 2020, which was really tricky timing because the next phase of this project was to disseminate a book of the work. And the idea behind the book was that it was to be sent to all of the 110 local authorities, housing and homelessness officers, MPs, councillors, ministers and departments for housing, communities and local government in each of the devolved nations, as well as all the members of the all-party parliamentary group for ending homelessness, and to as many people as possible across the homelessness and housing sector. But the timing wasn't right because, of course, as we all saw, the pandemic, of course, disrupted all of our lives, but in particular, and I don't need to tell you people, but the way that it disrupted services and provision was kind of completely unprecedented. And so, and especially with the everybody in, everyone in campaign, activity, action, whatever it was that we call it, it just wasn't right. So we held back on disseminating the publication until plans for the rolling back of everyone in began to be made known. And we used that as a kind of way to remind people that what we had seen, albeit in an emergency and crisis situation, was the most incredible kind of reinvention of what homelessness support provision could be that this country's probably ever seen, and that there were many things to be learned from that activity. And of course, how can we, in moving forward, coming out of that phase of the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, how can we just sort of like take stock and think, okay, so how can we do things differently? And in doing so, how can we ensure that people experiencing homelessness are leading that conversation and at the center of that conversation? And actually what was kind of extraordinary is that the publication kind of unveiled a whole raft of communication with local authorities around the country and MPs. And in some ways, I wasn't necessarily prepared for that or didn't expect that. But what was kind of wonderful about that is that places like Islington Borough Council confirmed how policy debate within the council was stimulated by the work. Exeter City Council spoke of how the work had led to discussions between cabinet members and a realization that the council practices needed to be more coherent and needed to be thought through differently. MPs such as Nikki Aitken in Westminster, MP for Westminster, invited Gerald and I to discuss the work with her in relation to the research that she was undertaking in preparation for the Westminster Hall debate on the Vagrancy Act in April of, was it 2021? So it was kind of, it kind of caused some ripples. And, Gerald and I are now kind of taking stock of where to go next with frequently asked questions, and I'll keep you posted. So I just wanted to quickly,
Anthony, I'm just so sorry to interrupt. I'm really loving this, but I'm conscious we are running a little bit over into the breakout room. So great. I'm just wondering whether we might be able to do. Could we come, because we've got you again in Q&A, and there are already some questions like Jackie's raised the kind of the issue of the ethics of representation of homelessness and just says that's something she's really interested in. I'm just wondering, would we be able to maybe look at agency sort of as a lead into the Q&A and go to breakout rooms, because we're really keen to give people that chance to have a bit of a discussion now, if that's all right.
That's a great idea, Alex. Let's do that, of course.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thanks for being so flexible, Anthony. And I could definitely listen to you talk about this all day, because I think there's just so much in here which is fascinating. It's from an art point of view, a representation point of view, but I think what really comes across in your work as well is this is so socially engaged, for want of a better word. It's engaged with life and with what needs to change, and with action and how you might change things as well as observe them. And that just feels so exciting. So Tabby is going to put us into breakout rooms, which we will run until, he says, just frantically checking the agenda. So I think we'll probably run those for about 15 minutes. And I think Tabby will be able to give you a kind of a couple of minutes warning before you're due to come back. So we're going to stick you into a couple of rooms. Anthony's going to facilitate one and Grant's going to facilitate the other. They have some questions for you, which we have now, but I think probably we can just sort of introduce you to those in the rooms. But the theme really is about people who have their own experiences of the issues that we're discussing, and how we can work with people, be teams which are inclusive, which are more diverse when it comes to lived experience, and how we are allowing ourselves to be challenged by people who have those experiences. So Anthony and Grant will tell you more. Breakout rooms for about 15 minutes, then maybe a little bit more from Anthony and questions. And if you, hopefully there'll be some questions that come from the feedback from the groups as well. So Tabby, take us away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Thank you kindly for that, setting up some really cracking breakout rooms. I think we're just going to keep cracking on now because time's against us, and we want to make the best use of just our time just together, if that's all right. And if people just want to just stretch their legs where they are, that would just be brilliant. I hope you had a cracking discussion in your group, Anthony, and we had similarly, I think, in our group, really quite stimulated by what you shared. So really, we're going to have a little bit of a time where we can do some Q&A just together. I think feel free just to use just some of our chat facility if colleagues want to add a few questions. But Anthony, you'll remember even just before the break, there was just a bit of a conversation, I think, triggered by one of the points you made about the ethics of representation of homelessness, how that is perceived in the media, images that are used, how it's talked about. That sparked a little bit of interest by some people. I don't know if there's something you want to unpack that a little bit more. I think some people are nervous about the abuse of people by images, the stereotypical images we use. I don't know if you want to unpack a little bit of your journey on that for us, Anthony.
Yeah, and I think we need to be cautious about representing people experiencing homelessness, about representing people living in poverty, about representing people at the sharp end of inequality. And I come from a photography background, so my training is not only in the sort of technical how to use equipment side of things, but is also thinking through the way that images create meaning and how photography is used to how photography is used in different contexts. And one of the things that I'm highly aware of is that people experiencing poverty, people experiencing homelessness have been represented throughout the history of photography, from the late 19th century through the practices of people like Jacob Riis, who was a social reform campaigner in New York, people like Thomas Annan, who was a photographer based in Glasgow, commissioned by the Glasgow City Council to document slums and the people living in them before they were cleared. Really kind of set up a trope, which then continued through the 20th century. And Jacob Riis in particular, what he did is he would go into the flop houses on the Bowery in the middle of the night using a flash, which had just been invented. He was one of the first people to use flash photography. And his intention was to photograph the living conditions or the accommodation conditions that people were experiencing or living in the flop houses. But in doing so, he would kind of blast light in the middle of the night, and people would wake up, look stupefied on the pictures. And this kind of approach really kind of established a way of using photography to represent people experiencing homelessness, which continues to today. And so the way that I work is thinking very critically about the history of representation, the politics and the ethics of working in that way, and trying to find a new way to use photography. So I'm not a photographer who will photograph you in a straightforward way. I'm likely to spend time with you, teach you how to use the equipment through a very sort of, back and forth process, ensure as best as I possibly can that the imagery that we create about you and your experiences is imagery that you are comfortable with and feels represents you in the best possible way.
Thank you for that. Incredibly helpful. And also hadn't realised maybe the connection just with some of the work that was done in Glasgow, just with the history just of that and that style of photography. If I can push a wee bit further, just because sometimes I sometimes have a reaction to sometimes how the sector markets and fundraises and uses a particular dialogue. And wrestle a little bit with the ethics of it. And previously I worked with Crisis, and they did some work with frameworks around some of the language and imagery, and even to challenge journalists, you know, of please, when you're writing an article, what images do you use? I don't know if you have strong reactions or feelings about what you see in that part of our sector.
Oh, I have very strong reactions about what happens there, but I can also understand the fear on the part of the marketing and fundraising departments within the sector, who often individuals might be very well intentioned, but who often come from professional backgrounds where they're not thinking so carefully about the experience of homelessness or the kind of ways in which people experiencing homelessness have been represented. So I think there's a kind of laziness on part of the organizations often, where they kind of know that they can kind of use imagery in a particular kind of way in order to do the things that they've already established in fundraising and marketing. And you know, I think some great work's being done by the Centre for Homelessness Impact at the moment around, you know, how language is used in the media, how images are used in the media, and trying to build up a kind of data-informed approach to kind of argue for new ways of working. But, you know, I think even, you know, and I see this in photography, which obviously intersects with media and with NGOs and whatever, that, you know, I think there are so many ways of using photography out there, and I would encourage people working for organizations to dig a little bit deeper and find photographers or journalists who have other ways of working.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Now we've got a hand up from Jackie Carpenter. Jackie, you want to come in and join the conversation? Have you got a question for Anthony?
It's more a comment, really. I think you talked about the fundraising and marketing people. It should be a really simple challenge, because there's a lot of research that shows that if you show, say it's a horse charity or a dog charity or a cat charity, and you show an animal in distress, most people just turn the page. They don't want to look at it. But if you show, here is the horse after we rescued it, the cat after we rescued it, the dog after we rescued it, and it looks happy and healthy and enjoying life, that's when people will put their hand in their pocket. So the same principle holds true when you're dealing anything with people. So if you look at things, you know, marketing about, say, I don't know, a hospice or a cancer charity, what do you see? Lots of smiling faces. Does cancer make people happy? No, of course not. But having your loved one have cancer doesn't make you feel happy, but it's the happy face that makes people put their finger in their pocket. So I just don't understand really why so many homelessness charities don't understand that. So we are now, I must say, I don't think we're very good at lived experience. In fact, we're pretty awful at that. But what we are good at is our images, because we have a PR agency and they take a photo. If we're doing a story about an individual, we only do it if the individual wants that and agrees to it. And we're very brutal when we say what the implications of being visible can be in the future. And, you know, we've got no control and it can go anywhere type of stuff. And that person, they vet their story, the words that are written down from what they've said, and they vet the image. And we use happy, smiley pictures of people who have been homeless to say, you know, you can put that smile on, like we've got on Grant's face, on Anthony's face or somebody else's face. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, Jackie, and it sounds like, you know, I think I don't think that you're in the majority, you and your organization, actually. And I think, you know, I have colleagues that work in the NGO sector who are currently trailblazing a campaign for an NGO whereby they're actually co-creating imagery that will be used in the fundraising campaign for the very first time through a process of co-design right through the whole way. And you know, it's 2023. This hasn't really been done much before. But, you know, I think that the representation of homelessness is really, really complex, culturally. And, people experiencing homelessness are treated like an abject spectacle in the urban environment. There's something about the way in which documenting that, showing that, often comes out of someone's good intentions, but good intentions are not irreproachable. And I think it's really incumbent upon anyone involved in representing people experiencing homelessness, whether it's through photography, whether it's through the work they do as an individual working for a homelessness support service, to really kind of bear in mind that people experiencing homelessness are so often kind of stripped of any agency and stripped of any kind of way in which they're able to express who they are and what their intentions are now and for the future. And that's everything that I try and do through my work. And it's not to say I get it right all the time, but I think it's one way of working.
Yes, that's what I call zoo TV, and I try to avoid that if I possibly can. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's so sad, really, that so many people are still locked in the past. I mean, if we want to show the negatives, what we show is we show a photograph of a doorway, which is somewhere that I know somebody has been sleeping, but there's nobody in it.
Absolutely, and that reminds me of the groundbreaking piece of work made by the artist Martha Rosler in the 1970s, who really has done the most extraordinary work around shifting the kind of cultural understanding of the way in which images and words function, particularly in the space of housing and homelessness, who created a series called The Bowery and Two Inadequate Descriptive Systems. And, rather than photographing people experiencing homelessness, she photographed the places on the Bowery where you would expect to see someone experiencing homelessness and paired those with Jackie, where do you work?
It's called Devonshire Housing Trust. We're in Derbyshire. Great.
It's lovely to meet you, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we've had photography we've offered to participants, and people have generated self-portraits. We used a lecturer from Coventry University, who's fabulous, by the way, to do that.
Who was that?
So, John Legg.
Legg, yes. Yeah.
You know John?
I do. He was the technician in the department that I ran. Yeah.
Yeah. So his manner with people was brilliant. So yeah, got everybody taking part. So,
wonderful. Good news.
I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. I do talk too much. Sorry.
Not at all, Jackie. That was just great. And that's a brilliant connection. Thank you just so much for that. Any other questions just from the room? Feel free just to raise your hand and we'll bring you in, or just add it just to the chat. When you were presenting, one of the things that just jumped out at me, Anthony, was the use of the phrase overly spoken for. I don't know if that's clearly a deliberate phrase of turning away for often we talk about underrepresented. So you really made me think, even just with the use of that. And I'm just wondering, just in the context of when we consider the voice of lived experience, if that resonates a lot, that terminology, does that strike a chord with others? Is that something that when you are working with people, that they feel that quite strongly and are looking for avenues to have their own voice rather than others to speak on their behalf?
I was just going to sort of reflect there, Grant. So I couldn't find my hand in time, so I raised a real hand, but it doesn't really work on Zoom. So I haven't been working in this sort of world for a very long time. I joined Mayday sort of a year and a half ago, and before that I'd been working doing lots alongside disabled people and other people who used social care services, and I was just struck by the difference and in the two kind of sectors, and particularly the impact that the disability rights movement has had on what are seen as acceptable conversations and nothing about me without me, and kind of power, particularly around services for disabled people, which feels very different, I think, in the homelessness sector. There isn't that sense, or I haven't found it yet, I think, of, despite brilliant initiatives like Museum of Homelessness, of a kind of a movement of people who are experiencing homelessness. And I think there are some sort of complex reasons for that. Some of them including the fact that we want to see homelessness as something that's brief brief, instance in somebody's lives. But nevertheless, there are actually people, of course, for whom it's nothing like that. It's something that can be a decades-long experience. And also, if we look at the social model of disability, actually the disabling aspects of a health condition or a physical impairment should be brief and temporary, even though they're not. So it just feels like there's some real learning to be had from looking across initiatives like Think Local Act Personal and its co-production work, and I think the disability rights movement more generally. It would be great to have a conversation across those groups of activists, I guess.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Just trying to reflect on how other sectors have tackled this issue and how somehow it still feels quite different just across those. I'm wondering, Anthony, we kind of stopped you during your presentation. You came to a point looking at agency, and I think your point just before last, we were touching on that. I'm wondering if it might just be kind of helpful to bring those slides back in, even just to share just some of your reflections just on that. We've got about 10 or so minutes just kind of left. And I wonder it would be helpful just to share some of your thoughts on these next few slides.
Yeah, I mean, agency is a title of the work that I created in Coventry with people experiencing homelessness through the pandemic in 2020. And it was commissioned by the City of Culture in Coventry. And originally, when the preparations for the work had taken place before the pandemic took hold, and so my kind of usual way of working by embedding myself within a physical premises of a support service had to be rethought. And so I took part in setting up an online forum with Arts and Homelessness International to create a monthly forum citywide in Coventry and the sort of region for individuals with lived experience of homelessness and representatives from the arts and social sector organizations to come together and support each other. But also it was a useful way for me to develop strong links with people. And so we set up workshops in emergency hotel accommodation. And when the emergency hotel accommodation was wound down, we transferred the workshops to outside spaces across the city. And in doing so, I work with participants to create the assisted self-portraits. So I meet a participant in locations that are important to them to teach them how to use medium format camera equipment tethered to a laptop over repeated sessions so that they can take control and understand the implication of the choices that a photographer makes and how that will infer onto the way in which a person is represented. And so here we have Benji and Bernie Haworth. And it's very much a process of teaching and learning. And here we have Ali. And Mick Bickley. The locations are places that are significant to the individual. And so here was the building behind Mick on the top right-hand side. You can see a window above his head. That was the room in which he was born. And it was really lovely. It was his 65th birthday when we made this work. Here's Amy Howard. Amy's an extraordinary woman who's written a book called Autism and Me. And it's about her experience of being someone who has autism and is experiencing homelessness. It's available on Amazon, I believe. We chose the title agency for the work, both to refer to the notion of agency that a person experiencing homelessness is kind of either stripped of or is challenged by, but also the notion of agency in the relationship between a photographer and a subject, and how the person being photographed is either able or not to express their agency over how they are represented. But also because when we were designing the exhibition of the work, I facilitated workshops where the participants edited and designed a community newspaper that was distributed across the city for free throughout the City of Culture. But we also decided where the work would take place. And in Coventry, the main pedestrian route from the train station into the city centre is along a street called Warwick Row, which is also known as Real Estate Row because there are so many real estate agents. And it just seemed like a great location to show the work because of the pedestrian traffic, but also because of its proximity to the real estate agents. And here we have Benji speaking at the launch of the exhibition. And the work was shown in this way, where we borrowed the kind of visual language of real estate agency for sale and for rent boards. And then we were invited to show the work in Landskrona in Sweden as part of a photography festival which focused on social justice. And so together we co-designed this display for a group exhibition. And then we were invited to show the work in Oslo in Norway, where we showed the work in this beautiful room in the old public library in Oslo, as well as on the street. And we published a new edition of the agency newspaper for Oslo as well. And yeah, so here was the work on a 30-meter banner in the center of Oslo. And then when the first exhibition in Coventry took place, and I wrapped up the weekly workshops, participants have continued to work together and meet, and we still communicate through WhatsApp as well. And they call themselves the Agency Photography Group. And so myself and colleagues kind of sit on the sidelines and support when needed to enable and assist the participants to create their own exhibitions and work as well. And this was their first exhibition as the Agency Photography Group, which took place at Warwick University in the Fab, and consisted of new photographs from the agency project, but also writing as well. That's Mick, and that's John, and that's Tracy, and that's Bernie, and that's Sue, and Amy, and Ali, and Arshak. And that's it. That's agency.
It's just really powerful just sitting watching through that, Anthony. I think you probably know that if you've shared that, you know, in other spaces, as you clearly have, just watching it. I'm reminded of, sadly, how sometimes our interactions with people can be quite transactional rather than relational. And I am wondering, there's clearly a depth of a relationship that you have with the people that you have worked with. Are there things that surprise you or that you wish other people knew in an appropriate way, particularly statutory services, about the people that you have worked with? Because people are so often misunderstood. And I don't know if there's things that jump out at you. You remind me, I forgot the gentleman's name, but the window behind him where he was born.
Oh,
people have known that detail or have even bothered to be interested, you know, in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that come to mind, Grant. You know, for me, it's about meeting people and getting to know people. And sometimes, you know, that leads to not making work together. But that doesn't mean I discard with knowing them. Sometimes it means we do work together and create work together that's exhibited or published. And, you know, just yesterday, actually, I was walking into Brixton, to my local tube, and I bumped into Phil Robinson. Phil was the person that I worked with over a year and a half to develop the assisted self-portrait method before I then used it for the first showing of the work in 2005. So I've known Phil since 2002. He was one of the first people that I worked with, and he's now housed. He has a practice as a photographer, and he lives near me. We see each other all the time. It's about getting to know people. Sometimes those relationships kind of fade away, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes, and I think for me, you know, issues of consent are really important, but not just having a form that people sign. And most forms that are presented to people are written to safeguard the organization, not the people that they're asking to sign it. You know, it's about ensuring that every time I do a project, I design a new consent form that's written for and with the people that I'm working with, and draws upon a wide range of research each time that is going on in the sector, as well as amongst my community and in consultation with participants, but also ensuring that people know that they can change their mind, and that I'll do what I can, but it becomes more and more complicated in this sort of hyper networked world that we live in. I'll do what I can to honor their request if they change their mind. But you know, it's yeah, I've lost my train of thought and probably not answered your question, but that's what comes to mind.
No, that's good. We've got, we're coming just to a close. We've got another question just from the chat, which was about this particular approach. So has this artistic approach been used to demonstrate some of the appalling housing conditions, which are, you know, off the street? So think about sofa surfing or squatting, etc. I don't know if you're aware of different, you know, models or methods of photography that have been used to demonstrate that.
Look, there are some really interesting participatory or socially engaged methods that have been used around the world with different communities and groups of people. I mean, in terms of actually focusing on drawing attention to housing conditions, it's a really great question, and Jane, I'm going to remember that, and I'll come back to you with some suggestions if you would like that. But you know, obviously, when we speak about homelessness, we're not just talking about people sleeping rough. We're talking about people who might be sofa surfing or living in squats or living in temporary accommodation. The current projects that I'm working on, I'm embedded in a team of community midwives and focused care workers in the Shared Health Foundation in Oldham in Manchester. And I've been working on this work for about a year now. And I'm co-creating portraits with families living in temporary accommodation and finding ways to articulate their experience and to visualize that as well. And my next exhibition, which opens on the 29th of June, is another sort of 18-month project. It's slightly different. It's a little adjacent to homelessness, but it's certainly in the realm of housing justice, where I've been working on the phenomenon of poor doors. So this phenomenon, which began around 2014 in this country, where social housing or affordable housing tenants have access to their homes through different doors in the same building as market rate tenants, and also don't have access to things like children's playgrounds or other communal spaces. And so I did a deep dive research into finding as many of these places, developments across London, and in particular in Tower Hamlets, which historically is one of the poorest boroughs in the city and in the country. Not at the moment though. So we located 8 developments, which is roughly 1,000 households, and invited all 1,000 households to form a community forum. Not all 1,000 joined, of course. And together with the community forum, we've been trying to draw attention to the kind of the complexity of this issue. So not quite answering the question in terms of sofa surfing, squatting, but certainly in terms of unequal forms of housing and essentially segregation on the lines of poverty and people who are not poor.
Anthony, thank you just so much for that, and thank you for your time. Folks, we're coming just to the end of our planned just time together. I think Alex had shared it before, but I've just added to the chat Anthony's just kind of website. I think just a few things just for us just to say, and on behalf of everybody here, Anthony, a huge thank you for just coming and sharing that significant you know, presentation with us. I think we've really appreciated that, challenging us, and this will not leave us today as we disappear from this meeting. I think those images and your challenges will remain with us, and so they should, as we then think about how we can maybe bring more lived experience really into challenging and thinking about the way in which we see people and see them as individuals rather than just people who are just homeless. Thank you also to Alex and to Tabby and others just from Mayday Trust for facilitating this space. Please, if you're interested, please have a look on the New Systems Alliance website if that's something that you're interested in. We often host events like this, so do take a look at that just for some upcoming events. If you want to register and join in with that, that'd be great. And really, I think unless Alex, there's anything else to say, a huge thank you for everybody for coming today. I hope you really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Grant. Thanks, Anthony.